It was supposed to be just another shift. A coffee order, a crowded cafe, and a man in a worn coat standing quietly in line. But when Rachel saw the look in his eyes, the kind of look that says, "I've been turned away before," she made a choice. One coffee, one seat, one moment of dignity. She didn't know cameras were watching. She didn't know that in less than 48 hours, she'd be out of a job. And she had no idea the entire town was about to take sides. This is the story of the day one woman refused to look away, and how her act of kindness set off a chain reaction no one saw coming. The sun peeked over the hills of Lakeside, a town stitched together by traditions and quiet resilience. The streets were still damp from the early mist, and the scent of freshly baked bread floated from the corner bakery. In the heart of Main Street sat a cozy, modest place called Brew Haven, not just a coffee shop, but the community's morning heartbeat. And behind the counter stood Rachel Carter, a woman whose apron bore not just espresso stains, but quiet resolve. Every morning she unlocked the doors before dawn, turned on the lights, and brewed the first pot of coffee as if she were preparing for something sacred. Rachel wasn't just a manager. She was a storyteller, a keeper of names and memories. She remembered how one patron, Henry, liked his mocha with exactly one pump of caramel, not two. She knew that June, who always sat by the window, had lost her son in Fallujah and liked it when the music stayed soft. But her heart belonged to one tradition above all: the Veterans Hour every Thursday at 9 a.m., a time when local service members gathered to decompress, to be seen, to share silence and stories in equal measure. Rachel made it happen, not because it was policy, but because it was personal. Her father, a Marine, had taught her long before he passed that some people carry battles long after the war ends. That morning, Rachel placed a reserved sign on the long oak table by the window and brewed an extra pot of dark roast. Then the bell over the door rang, and in came Hank Lewis, retired Air Force mechanic, accompanied as always by his service dog, Echo. The dog moved quietly, confidently, trained for PTSD, alert to every breath. Rachel greeted them both with a warm smile. "Your usual seat, Hank." As they settled in, she placed a muffin beside his cup. "On the house," she said with a nod. What happened next would change her life, and the town forever. The soft murmur of conversation filled Brewhaven as the veterans gathered. Hank sat quietly, his fingers gently stroking Echo's fur as if grounding himself in the present. Across the table, a young Army reservist shared a story about a training mishap, drawing laughter and knowing nods. Rachel moved through the cafe with effortless grace, refilling mugs, listening where it mattered, and offering space where it didn't. These weren't just customers, they were her responsibility. That's when the tension walked in, on the clack of designer heels. Megan Whitmore, the newly appointed regional director of the Brew Haven franchise, entered like a gust of cold wind. Clipboard in hand, eyes sharp and assessing, she barely glanced at the veterans before zeroing in on Rachel. "Rachel," Megan said, her voice all performance and precision. "Can I speak to you in the back, please?" Rachel glanced at the table, then followed Megan behind the counter. The conversation started with pleasantries, but quickly turned pointed. Megan cited brand image, liability concerns, and unapproved seating arrangements. Then came the phrase that would haunt Rachel for months. "We need to be more selective about who we allow to linger here." Rachel blinked. "You mean the veterans?" Megan didn't answer directly. She didn't have to. The implication hung heavy between them like steam over a forgotten kettle. Rachel's jaw tightened. With respect, Megan, they've earned the right to linger. What followed was a warning, formally phrased but emotionally barbed. Limit the veterans' hour. No more reserved seating. No more free muffins. It was time to streamline operations. Rachel returned to the counter, hands trembling. Her eyes met Hank's for a moment, and she forced a smile. But something had cracked inside her, something loud and unignorable. It wasn't in Rachel's nature to start a fight, but it was in her nature to finish one, especially when the fight picked her. The next morning, the veteran's hour began as usual, but a subtle unease lingered. Rachel moved with practiced calm, but her mind was elsewhere, on Megan's threat and the hollow corporate terms like foot traffic optimization and demographic alignment. Words that masked discrimination behind spreadsheets. She didn't wait for permission. She made her own sign. Printed in bold font, pinned right beside the specials board, it read, "Reserved from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. for those who served." She didn't stop there. Coffee was still on the house. Muffins, too. She added a playlist of classic songs from different service eras, a subtle act of defiance wrapped in warmth. It wasn't long before Megan returned, this time with 2 other executives and a brand compliance officer. Their presence cast a chill over the cafe. The moment they spotted the sign, the mood shifted. Hank looked up as Megan approached. "Ma'am," he said, ever respectful, "if you're here to cancel breakfast, I'd suggest you do it before my second cup." Megan ignored him. She turned to Rachel and said it plainly. "Take the sign down, now." Rachel met her gaze without flinching. "No." The cafe fell silent. Forks paused midair. A young Marine veteran, just out of uniform, sat upright. It wasn't just a sign anymore. It was a stand, and everyone in that room knew it. The executives huddled, whispered, checked their phones. Then Megan stepped forward again. "You leave us no choice. You're terminated, effective immediately." Rachel stood still. No outburst, just a slow blink as the words hit. She removed her apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the counter. Hank rose. So did every veteran. One by one, they followed her out of the cafe in complete silence. A community had just lost its anchor, but something far more powerful had just been set in motion. The sun hadn't climbed much higher when the town started buzzing. First, a teenager live-streamed the walkout. Then, a retired nurse posted a photo of Rachel holding the folded apron. By lunchtime, hashtags were trending. Brew Haven stand. Veterans before margins. Rachel did right. But Rachel wasn't thinking about any of that. She was in her apartment, quietly sitting by the window, holding the keys to a place she no longer belonged to, or so she thought. A knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find Hank holding 2 cups of coffee from another diner, his gait slower, but his purpose steady. "Didn't taste the same," he grunted. "Figured we'd try again here." He wasn't alone. Behind him stood dozens. Veterans, neighbors, former staff. Sarah, the barista, had left mid-shift to join them. Daniel, a high school senior who used to bus tables, offered his college fund savings, $742.13. "It's not much, but you kept me working when no one else would." By sundown, Brew Haven had been tagged in thousands of posts, but what mattered more was what happened offline. Rachel's phone lit up with messages from business owners offering space, lawyers offering services pro bono, even a retired colonel offering to fund a pop-up until something permanent could be built. It wasn't just loyalty, it was movement, one that had roots in something deeper, the belief that dignity should never be optional. The next day, a new sign appeared in the same window at Brewhaven. Only it wasn't from Rachel, it was from Megan. Closed for renovations. But the townspeople knew better. They also knew something else. They didn't need the old Brewhaven to build something better. It began in a borrowed church kitchen. No sign, no fancy machines. Just a few tables, borrowed percolators, and a hand-painted board that read, "The Second Brew." Hank showed up early every morning to unlock the doors. Rachel showed up with a notebook full of community ideas and the same steady conviction that had once cost her a job. But this time, it was building something. Daniel built a basic website overnight. Donations started to pour in, not just money, but coffee beans from veteran-owned roasters, artwork from local schools, even hand-knit scarves with tags reading, "Because you stood up when others sat down." They didn't try to recreate the old Brewhaven. They designed something new. No tips, no uniforms. Every menu item had a pay-it-forward option. One wall featured a mural of coffee cups clinking together, each one painted by a customer and signed underneath with a first name and one word. Heard, safe, proud, home. Rachel refused interviews for weeks, not because she didn't have anything to say, but because she knew when to let others speak first. Sarah organized an open mic night. Hank gave his first ever public talk. "I wasn't looking for help," he told the small crowd. "I was looking for a reason not to disappear." And it worked. The city council soon announced a new grant initiative supporting dignity-driven business models. One by one, other cafes, barbershops, and even hardware stores started adding community programs. Some subtle, some loud, all inspired by what Rachel started when she stood between a man and a manager and said, "This isn't okay." What Rachel didn't expect was what happened next. Brewhaven's old location went up for lease. Quietly. No fanfare. Just a small sign and an empty interior. The same week, a lawyer representing an anonymous donor made contact with Rachel. Their message was simple. "You're not starting over. You're just starting." Rachel didn't walk into the old Brewhaven like a returning employee. She walked in like someone claiming ground that was always hers. The building hadn't changed much. Same windows, same tiles, same counters that once hummed with judgment. But this time, Rachel didn't hesitate. She paused just long enough to run her fingers along the chipped wood near the register, then called in her team. Daniel unlocked the new point-of-sale system. Hank placed the first bag of beans on the counter, nodding as if to say, "Let's do this." And Sarah walked in with a camera crew, now filming a local docuseries titled Roots and Resistance. When the doors reopened to the public, the name on the glass was different. Grounds of Honor. Day one saw a line out the door, not just for coffee, but for a chance to be part of something. Families brought handwritten notes. Veterans wore their old pins. Local reporters finally got their headline. "Fired for integrity, now founder of a movement." And Veronica? She didn't speak to the press, but she did show up, unannounced, sunglasses on, standing at the back of the line. When it was her turn, she ordered tea. Rachel stepped to the counter and served her personally. No bitterness, no commentary, just a quiet, "Thank you for stopping by." It was Veronica who broke the silence. She placed a $100 bill in the tip jar labeled pay it forward to someone who feels invisible, and said, "You built something I never could." As she left, no cameras followed her, but every eye in the cafe had seen what mattered. Grounds of Honor wasn't just a business. It was a symbol, more than a coffee shop. It was a new blueprint, proof that standing up for someone might cost you everything, but it might also give you back something even greater: the power to rewrite the story. The success of Grounds of Honor was never about profit margins or brand recognition. It was about momentum, the kind that shifts a town's posture without anyone realizing it until it's already happened. 3 weeks after the cafe opened, the mayor dropped by for coffee. Not with press, not with security, just himself, a pen, and a city council proposal to rename the downtown green space Veterans Square. The vote passed unanimously. Local schools began inviting Rachel to speak, not as a businesswoman, but as a citizen who dared to do the right thing when silence would have been easier. Hank started mentoring at the local shelter, cutting hair for veterans on Tuesdays. Sarah launched a podcast titled Second Chances Brewed Strong. And Daniel? He no longer wore his military cap as armor. Now it was a conversation starter, one he used to welcome others into his world. He smiled more, trusted more. And when he was asked to cut the ribbon at the opening of a second Grounds of Honor in a nearby city, he did it without hesitation. There was no press frenzy that day, just the echo of something real: kindness reclaiming space. Rachel kept every letter she received in a box under the counter, one that grew fuller by the week. From teens who said they felt seen. From old friends who admitted they should have spoken up sooner. From other fired workers around the country who now believed it was possible to stand up and still land on their feet. She called the box the real paycheck. And sometimes, late at night, when the cafe was closed and the street outside was quiet, Rachel would take out one of the letters and read it aloud, just to hear the sound of proof that she wasn't alone. 6 months after her termination, Rachel received an envelope in the mail. No return address, just her name, written in blocky, deliberate strokes. Inside was a handwritten note on the faded stationery. The ink bled slightly at the edges, as if it had traveled through time and weather to find her. The handwriting was unmistakable. "Rachel, I never got the chance to say thank you. That day, I felt like a ghost, like the world had passed me by. You didn't look through me. You saw me. I thought losing my job was the worst thing that could happen. Turns out, being reminded that I still mattered changed everything. This world moves fast, but that moment with you made me want to stay a little longer. Still grateful. Still here. Daniel." She read it 3 times before she folded it and slid it into the real paycheck box. That evening, she framed one line from his letter and mounted it above the register in Grounds of Honor too. Visitors who read it often paused. Some took a photo. Others just stood quietly, understanding. The quote read, "You didn't look through me. You saw me." And above it, in a smaller font, another inscription. Sometimes, the first act of revolution is refusing to look away. Months passed, and the ripple effects kept widening. Local newspapers began running pieces, not just about Grounds of Honor too, but about workplace ethics, dignity, and the courage of small acts. Rachel found herself invited to panels, podcasts, even community college lectures. She wasn't an activist. She didn't wear the label hero. She was just someone who had once said, "This isn't right," and refused to back down. One day, As the cafe bustled with life, laughter, coffee grinding, pages flipping, Rachel noticed a young woman hesitating by the door. She was dressed neatly, clearly nervous. "Can I help you?" Rachel asked. I read about you, and the letter, and I." The woman paused. "I brought mine." From her coat pocket, she pulled out a wrinkled letter, edges worn from being handled too often. Rachel didn't read it right then. She just nodded and said, "Welcome. Coffee's on the house." They sat by the window. Later, Rachel added another drawer to the real paycheck box, this one labeled "Continued," because every act of courage births another. And when Daniel passed, peacefully, surrounded by friends he'd reconnected with and volunteers who'd once only known him from news clips, his service was held in the very field he used to walk in silence. Rachel was asked to speak. She didn't prepare a speech. She just stood at the podium and read from the first letter he had sent her, not as a eulogy, but as a reminder. When she finished, the crowd didn't clap. They just stood, silently, gratefully. Not all revolutions begin with raised fists. Some begin with a quiet refusal to look away. Rachel Turner didn't set out to make history. She wasn't chasing viral fame or public acclaim. She simply honored what she saw in front of her. A man forgotten, a story dismissed, and the undeniable power of one voice choosing not to be silent. In a world where policies often override principles and where convenience too easily replaces courage, her decision to act came at a cost. But that cost, her job, her comfort, her peace, became an investment in something far larger. Dignity with roots, kindness with structure. Change that could be measured not in hashtags, but in housing grants, restored faith, and handwritten letters that traveled further than any resume. Daniel may have been overlooked by a system, but he wasn't unseen. And Rachel? She didn't just stand up for him, she built a platform beneath both of them. So, what's the legacy? That when you choose to see people, not problems, when you give someone the space to reclaim their worth, your single act might just unlock hundreds more. Coffee by coffee, letter by letter, it only takes one person to tilt the scale. Be that person, even when it's quiet, especially then.